Hello and welcome to this edition of Criminal Justice Natters with me, Ed Johnston. Today we are joined by Dr. Sandra Lean, who is heavily involved in the Luke Mitchell case and his sort of appeal journey in terms of an appeal against a murder conviction in the early part of the 2000s. He was convicted of murdering his 14-year-old girlfriend. And what we discussed today, I think, highlights a number of holes and issues in this case, some of which will be familiar to our viewers from other cases that we've looked at. If you are interested in any further information regarding the Mitchell case, please check out Dr. Lean's book, Innocence Betrayed, which is available pretty much everywhere. So please feel free to check that out if this does pique your interest. If you do, after watching the video, have any information that might be useful to the case, please get in touch with Dr. Sandra Lean and we'll explain how to do that toward the end. Enjoy.
Hi, Sandra. Thanks for joining us today for what is surely going to be a really interesting chat. And we're going to discuss the Luke Mitchell case. And I was wondering if you could tell our viewers who might not be familiar with the case, basically what happened in a nutshell and why we are having this discussion today.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me as well. This is another opportunity to get the story out to people. So back in back in 2003, June 30th, 2003, 14-year-old girl Jodi Jones was on her way to meet her boyfriend Luke Mitchell. She never arrived, and later that night she was found brutally murdered behind a wall on a shortcut that she would have taken from her own house to her boyfriend's house. And within days, I mean 2-3 days, the focus of the police investigation had turned on her boyfriend, on Luke Mitchell, who was also 14 at the time. And what then happened was approximately 19 months of media hysteria focusing on this 14-year-old boy before he was brought to trial, and eventually in 2005, when he was 16, convicted of the murder, sentenced to life without limit of time, with a minimum period that he must serve of 20 years. This year will be, actually yesterday was the 17-year anniversary of when he was first incarcerated.
Okay. If I can just pick up on a couple of things that you said there in that narrative. You said within days the focus of the investigation became sort of centered around Luke. Was there any particular reason for that, or was it just because he was the boyfriend?
At the time, there didn't seem to be any particular reason other than that he was the boyfriend. We've since found out that the investigating officers leaving Jodi's mum's house that night, so she'd been reported missing, and the police had gone to take the missing person details. And the police that left her house after those missing person details had been given had several pieces of completely wrong information. So they were running on the basis that Jodi had left her house at tea time with her boyfriend, but now he was saying he hadn't seen her. Well, that wasn't the case, you know, she didn't leave with her boyfriend, and so on and so on. So it now looks like there were a number of misunderstandings at the beginning that made police on the ground suspicious of Luke, and then the investigation just rolled on the back of those suspicions rather than them being checked out and going, oops, that was a mistake.
Yeah, and in terms of those misunderstandings and what you mentioned, the sort of what you said at the start, the 19 months of media hysteria, could you give our viewers maybe a flavour of sort of how big this story was and what the coverage was like?
This is a small area. It's actually a series of small interlinked villages, a mining community, and the media went absolutely crazy. There were photographers and reporters everywhere, all of them screeching, this maniac on the loose, you know, find the killer, all that sort of thing. They were virtually camped outside Luke Mitchell's family home. The family couldn't move, they couldn't do anything without photographers there taking pictures, shouting questions, shoving microphones in their face. You know, it was really, really big, but really, really relentless. It was on every news broadcast, every hour of the day, for days and weeks and months.
Yeah, and that was just non-stop then, what the family had to put up with. And how was Luke sort of painted in the media?
Initially, they didn't outright accuse him. So it was things like, so he was taken in for questioning on the 4th of July, so 4 days after Jodi's body was found.
Yeah.
And this was done in a blaze of publicity. And then, of course, he was released without charge. Same thing again 6 weeks later. And pictures of them taking bags and bags of stuff from the house that they kept calling evidence. Well, at that stage, it was just stuff. But you can see how this picture was beginning to build now. Initially, they weren't outwardly derogatory about him, although there was no question where the finger was being pointed. They weren't outright derogatory about him until about 10 weeks later, the day of Jodi's funeral. Luke was told he was not welcome at the funeral. They were worried he would turn it into a media circus. And he and his mum were having a little vigil at home. And Sky News asked if they could film it. They promised it wouldn't go out that day, asked if they could film it. And then the reporter proceeded to question Luke about things the police would have had to have asked him under caution.
Yeah.
From that point in, Luke Mitchell was the devil incarnate in the media.
Okay. And so this just spirals. And was there, in the local area, you say it's a tiny sort of area, was there any sort of support for Luke, or was it generally a negative feeling against him on the back of the media representations?
Absolute blanket belief the boyfriend did it. And you know, I lived locally, so it's a bus shelters, local shops. All the talk was, he's evil, why have they not arrested him yet? And I'm thinking, well, yeah, exactly. If this is the guy and they've got him red-handed, why is he still walking about weeks and months later?
Yeah.
Which in many ways in the early stages was what grabbed my attention. If they're so sure it's this kid, why haven't they arrested him?
Yeah. And in terms of grabbing your attention, can you explain how you became sort of involved in this case? Because you're not necessarily from a criminal justice background, is that correct?
No, it was actually quite accidental. I was running a natural health centre. I was a qualified alternative therapist, and because this happened locally, and I'm starting to have quite serious questions about all this gossip and rumour and innuendo that's coming into the public domain, and I'm thinking, oh dear, wait a minute, you know, if this is the guy, how is he ever going to get a fair trial with all of this stuff swirling about? So, you know, I was talking to friends of mine and just discussing the possibility that they'd gone off in the wrong direction. And Luke's mum heard through a series of people linked to people about my take on it. And she put a note through the door of the place of work asking if I could help her family. And at the time I thought, well, how on earth can I help them? These are just my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And that then catapulted me into a world of learning 2 different legal systems, forensics, criminology, how the media works. just a crazy, absolute change of direction.
You couldn't pick further apart things, I suppose. In terms of the forensic evidence and any form of evidence that would support a prosecution's case. What evidence was there that led to Luke's conviction?
There was no solid piece of evidence, for want of a better way of putting it. So this was a circumstantial case, and even the judges said, you know, these individual pieces of evidence would not be strong enough to stand alone. It's only the weight of them taken together to make the circumstantial case that allows this case to be put forward. So things like they said Luke's alibi, which was given to him by his mum and his brother, was false, that his mum and his brother had lied to give him an alibi. They said that he had special knowledge because he'd led the search party straight to the body, and in order to do that, he must have known where the body was.
Yeah.
There was another ground. There are three main planks of the prosecution case. So there's the Luke led them to the body. The eyewitness. There was a eyewitness sighting of Luke and Jodi at the entrance to the path, at her end of the path, you know, at the end that she lived at. So these were the three main planks, all of which, incidentally, have been absolutely destroyed by the evidence itself.
Yeah. So, yes, because Luke's mother, I watched the Channel 5 documentary, and Luke's mother was initially charged with perverting the course of justice, and then 9 months after that, those charges were dropped. Was Luke convicted by that stage?
No, the charges against his mother and his brother were dropped when they took the stand to give their evidence in the trial against Luke.
Okay.
Now, up to that point, the jurors presumably would have known that they'd been charged with perverting the course, or attempting to pervert the course of justice, but the jury was sent out while these charges were dropped and then brought back in again.
Oh, right.
Okay. Yeah, you just have to think about that for a minute.
Yeah. And in terms of the specialist knowledge, it was purely the location of Jodi Jones's body, that there's no DNA evidence or blood anywhere or nothing like that. It's purely the location.
Yeah, there is no forensic evidence of any description that links Luke to Jodi or the murder scene, to her clothing, to her body, to the murder scene, or vice versa. None.
Okay. So we have an alibi that's accepted to be true because any charges were dropped. We have no forensic evidence. We have this idea of specialist knowledge, but I think you can ask, if you did dispose of a body somewhere, why would you be the person that leads the, this is what I didn't understand from the documentary, the last thing I would want to do would be the one that finds the body, but that doesn't seem to make...
It's quite interesting because part of the prosecution case, or part of the police case, was that Luke, after the murder at 5:15, very precise time that we have no evidence of, had spent the rest of the evening distancing himself from the murder, trying to make himself look normal. And then when Jodi's mum says, "Where's Jodi?" and she's not there, he leads them straight to the body. Well, I mean, if he spent the whole evening distancing himself, why does he suddenly go, "Oh, I know, I'll lead them straight to it"? It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. And the eyewitness, you said that evidence didn't stand up to scrutiny in the end. Is that the case with that as well?
Again, we didn't find out about this, not only till after the trial, but until after the appeal. The eyewitness was supposed to be completely independent. She didn't know Jodi's family, she didn't know Luke's family, she had no connection to them whatsoever. First up, the people she described bore no resemblance to Luke and Jodi. The descriptions were nothing like either of them that night. And then we find out later that her brother-in-law was in Jodi's granny's house the morning after Jodi's body was found, telling the family about this sighting that she'd made. 3 days later, he's in Jodi's mum's house talking about this sighting. Meanwhile, he's going back and forward, and he's in this witness's house while she's giving her statements to the police.
Okay.
but she was supposed to be completely independent. Interestingly, members of Jodi's family at trial tried to distance this guy. So he was brought up at trial, but we didn't know why. And they went out of their way to distance him and try and say, you know, there was hardly any connection between them and everything as well.
Okay, so they wanted to create that idea that this person is independent and not, you know,
Yeah.
known to the family. So was the eyewitness evidence then accepted by the court that this person did see Jodi and Luke at that end of the lane or the wood, but towards Jodi's house? Was that accepted by the court?
I suppose it depends what you mean by accepted. So first of all, she'd identified Luke from a photo spread of 12 pictures, in which Luke's was the only one in a white background, he was the only one with long hair, and he was
Right.
older. The others were obviously younger. So that was her identification. She comes to court and can't identify him in the dock. And in Scotland, dock identifications are still allowed.
Yeah.
So they say, can you see the person that you saw in that day in the court today? And she says no. So that's a non-identification.
Yeah.
The appeal judges then later said that she'd seen someone that jurors were entitled to infer could have been Jodi. Not that it was, just that
No.
it could have been.
Okay.
So I guess people can decide for themselves, was that an identification?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking it from sort of, you know, with what's at stake here with this trial, that at best sounds flimsy. We have, again, to return to no forensic evidence, there is an alibi, and this identification is questionable at best.
I suppose in particular, this lady was driving around a really sharp bend with two kids in the back of the car. And what she saw, you'll have seen in the documentary, she would have seen for a fleeting second. But Jodi had this huge bright orange logo across the back of her jacket.
Yeah.
And this lady describes the girl as wearing a blue sweatshirt with lighter blue bootcut jeans.
Okay.
It's a world away from what Jodi was actually wearing.
Yeah, and as you say, the documentary, they show the experiment of driving around this bend on a number of different occasions, trying to see if these people are recognised at that speed, time of day. It's incredibly difficult, and yeah, okay, that sounds, as I say, flimsy at best. So in terms of the investigation and Luke's defence, was there sort of adequate pretrial disclosure, or has there been things that were, you know, missed, or I won't say buried, but buried?
Okay. Yeah. We found out in 2014, because the case went to the Criminal Cases Review Commission here in Scotland, the SCCRC, and we found out that there was information that hadn't been released to the defence, in particular about this Stocky guy. So there was a guy seen following Jodi about 5:05 that night by two witnesses who described him, but it was believed he'd never been traced. We find out in 2014, one of those witnesses saw someone that she believed to be the same person and went back to the police with this guy's description and name, and the defence were never told.
Okay.
The commission then decided essentially that this witness's recall was better in 2014 than it was in 2003, because by 2014 she couldn't quite remember what she'd said back in 2003, and that was the information the commission went with. So no miscarriage of justice, because she couldn't remember in 2014. So we found that out from the commission. Since then, and since the documentary in particular, many people are coming forward now and saying, I need to tell you my experiences. I told the police this. I was questioned by the police about that, and they never came back. So there's just this initial contact, so many of them saying the police weren't interested in what I had to tell them.
Okay. And in terms of that, then, do you think that that may have a bearing on any appeal for Luke, or any status of the case?
Some of it, I would hope. I always say to people when they get in touch to tell me anything about back then, I can't take a statement from you. I can't ask any questions. I'll take your details and I will get someone to come to you and take a statement, because that way that information is preserved, and
Yeah.
then it can be used to go back to the SCCRC. And certainly
Okay.
there are a few people who've come forward with really quite significant information who we will get recorded statements from.
Okay, well that sounds promising. So if anybody does have any information, to contact you, and then you can arrange and
Yes.
facilitate an independent interview that will be properly
Yeah.
recorded and everything else.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
and please understand that I'm not being rude or disinterested when I can't ask questions. It's simply so that I can't be accused of
Yeah.
interfering or influencing what it is they have to say.
Okay, that sounds great. And hopefully somebody is watching, and perhaps they will have some information that they thought was rather innocuous at the time, but
Yeah.
perhaps carries some great significance. Okay. In terms of the documentary that was on Channel 5, how did that come about?
That was actually a very long process. So the filmmakers got in touch, and we had discussions back and forth about if this could be done, how it could be done, what was all going to be involved. Obviously, I am very protective when it comes to media.
Yeah.
Of making sure that anybody that's going to put something out there knows the facts. And the filmmakers, I have to say, were fantastic. But what a learning curve for them, because they'd come back to me and say, "What about this?" And then they'd have to know all of the background information from the case files, just so that they didn't inadvertently run with something that wasn't backed up.
Yeah.
It then all had to be checked by the legal people to make sure that everything that went out could legitimately be included. So
Yeah.
it was a very interesting process for me, just to see how these things are done, and how much work goes into keeping them accurate and keeping them legal.
How long did they film for in sort of in entirety?
About a year
A
in
year,
total.
a substantial amount of time then.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. You've previously mentioned when we've spoken before about the idea about the potential issues with a Section 14 police interview, and I was wondering if you could explain A, why this is, well, A, what they are, and then B, why this is particularly important in terms of Luke's case.
In Scotland back in 2003, the Section 14 interview essentially allowed the police to take in anybody and hold them for 6 hours and question them without a lawyer, legal representation, legal advice. They could just take them in and hold them for 6 hours and interrogate them. They were only allowed one of these in any investigation. In this case, they kind of got round it by having, prior to the Section 14 interview, they had what they called a voluntary attender interview. So they got an extra 6 hours from that. And then in the morning, after Jodi's body was found, so Luke was taken straight to the police station, and they had another 7 hours questioning without a lawyer at that point as well. But fast forward to the Section 14, because this is the interview that in many ways demonstrated the gloves were off and the police were gunning for Luke. So here we have, he's just turned 15, this 15-year-old kid. There are 3 officers playing good cop, bad cop, granddad cop, in and out all over the place. And that interrogation is horrific. I mean, some of the questioning, they were just bombarding him. 10, 12, 15 questions, bam, 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 bam. Not waiting for an answer. And then when Luke did manage to get a word in, they were saying things like, you're a liar, we know you're lying. It was just, and this is a kid.
Yeah.
They cherry-picked pieces of that interrogation where Luke, totally frustrated now, trying to get them to listen and they won't listen, kind of loses his temper and maybe swears or calls them a name or something. And they cherry-pick these bits to use at trial to show him as belligerent and having no respect for authority and all of that sort of thing. And you're thinking, even a grown adult would not have been able to sit and take hours and hours and hours of that and stay perfectly calm. And this was a child.
Yeah.
And that was legal. That was legal in Scotland.
And in terms of the sort of this evidence given at trial, did the court hear this sort of, badgering type questions of not allowing him to answer, or did they read the transcripts?
No, they didn't hear any of that. They
Right.
cut that out, and they only played the bit where Luke responded.
Okay.
So you hear. I think one of them was he said something like, Lothian and Borders police are effing idiots or something like that. And that's the clip they play. They don't do the 2.5 hours of badgering prior to that point. Just that one bit.
Just that one bit. Right. Because did the defence raise any issues with the sort of type of interrogation that Luke was subjected to as a 14-year-old boy, unaccompanied by either a family member or a legal representative or anyone? He's there alone, 14. Did the defence raise?
Not at trial, simply because it was legal.
Right.
And the nature of the interrogation, the prosecution didn't depend on the nature of the interrogation. They only depended on the little pieces. So when it came to appeal, that was addressed. The defence did address the nature of the interrogation, both for Luke and for his brother. And Donald Finlay said they tried to break his brother the way they tried to break Luke. So straight away, they're saying those interrogations were intended to break witnesses and suspects, not to garner information, not to find out what happened, but to break them. And the appeal court just said he gave as good as he got.
15-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And you've been using the past tense in terms of the Section 14 interview. So have they've been outlawed now? They
have, yes. The Scottish justice system had been warned for years by the European Court that they had to stop doing it, that this was out of order. It was 2011, I believe, before they were finally stopped.
Okay.
So not that long ago.
No, not that long ago at all. And you wonder how many other suspects, vulnerable suspects, young suspects, people with mental health and mental disabilities that have been subjected to this stuff as well. It sounds truly horrific.
Yeah.
We've talked about the sort of media portrayal at the time and during the trial. Is there any sort of media coverage of this sort of now, and has the flavour changed a little bit in light of this sort of post 2011 type interviews?
It is the most ridiculous thing. There have been a couple of positive articles, I have to say that first and foremost, a couple, but the tabloids are still going down the route of, here are 10 reasons why he's guilty. Yeah, we just debunked all of those. Why are you putting that again? Another one that actually was just brought to my attention this morning, it's a couple of weeks old. They're reporting that local residents are enraged that there's graffiti saying Luke Mitchell is innocent on a local landmark. Enraged. They're not enraged by the fact there's this massive miscarriage of justice. But yeah, the media's reporting that they're enraged about graffiti. But no, as a general rule, as they've done so many times in the past, they're just ignoring it.
Okay.
giving it no coverage, no attention, just hoping that it's going to go away. It's not.
No, no.
It's like to make this point, it's not. It will be 18 years in June since I started doing this. It is not going anywhere until it's sorted.
Just to return what you said a little bit earlier about this sort of Stocky guy that was perhaps identified at the scene. So whilst that wasn't disclosed, was he then ever traced or accounted for in any of the appeals or anything like that?
No,
No.
no, and it's quite surprising that he wasn't followed up, because the suggestion by the witness was that he was someone very close to Jodi's family.
Oh, okay. So he might have been identified then. So you might know who he is. I'm not asking you to name him, but
Yeah.
for the purposes of the case, he's known.
Yeah. But
Okay.
you would have thought, that being the case, the investigators at the time would have looked at the information they had and gone, that doesn't fit with this. Let's have another look at it. And they did nothing. They did nothing with it.
No.
And appeals in the media for Stocky Man or anybody that might know who he is to come forward just disappeared. It just all went away.
Okay. And do you think that's a feeling because the police think, well, we've got our guy, so it doesn't matter.
Yes.
This kid did it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything that we've gone back to them with after the event, even the 2006 identification of the two new people that nothing about ostensibly at the time. So Mark Kane and James Faulkner, we knew nothing about them till 2006. Turns out that the police did know about Mark Kane in 2003. Anyway, the police spoke to both, and when we asked them, Mr. Faulkner in particular, when we asked them why they didn't follow up on his statements in 2006, when it became apparent that he'd lied, the response was, well, we didn't have to follow up on it because the case is closed. Luke Mitchell's been convicted.
Right. So, yeah.
Round and round.
Yeah. And I mean, this is probably an entirely frustrating question, but what's the sort of current steps, or is there anything that's sort of in the pipeline of what might happen in the future, or is it a case of you're waiting for further information to be discovered or that person to come forward? Or
yeah, I mean, I think everybody's aware now that I put out the petition in the first place saying we need a completely independent review of this case, because we have this whole circular thing where the police complaints will go nowhere, and then they say, well, you've got resource to the SCCRC, which, as I've already pointed out, is also going nowhere. And if you do the independent review for Hillsborough, then they could do it for cases like this. There are a couple of routes that I don't want to go into detail about, but there are a couple of that have been brought to my attention by experts and people in the field that said, have you thought about this? And the answer is no, I hadn't, but I have now. So there are a few ways that we could potentially go, as well as any form of new evidence that either comes to us or that we turn up. So at the minute, I would say there are 4, possibly 5 potential lines that we need to explore, at least, that we could take back.
That sounds like it's a very good start. If nothing else, 4 to 5 potential leads. That's good.
Feels a lot further forward than it's been.
Sorry, can you say that again? Sorry, Sandra.
It feels a lot further forward than it's been for a long time.
Good. That sounds really good. And this might be a tough question to answer, but thinking about the everything that's gone on, what is, in your opinion, your biggest issue, or the thing you question the most about this particular miscarriage of justice?
I guess how it ever got to trial in the first place.
Yeah.
All of these cases, and we know this now, all of these cases begin and end with the police investigation.
Yeah.
Because the police investigation feeds the court system, feeds the trial system, feeds the appeal system, and on it goes. So it starts with the police investigation. Now, you know, people have been saying the whole system needs taken apart and started again. No, if we get it right at the police stage, then it should then all follow through. It's what goes wrong in the police investigations, and that for me, we have to look at that.
Yeah.
We have to look at it. It's such a huge issue, and like you said earlier, kids or maybe people with mental health issues being badgered and coerced in these ways to fit a narrative. Where does the narrative come from? Well, some guy sitting there thinking, I know, here's the story that we're going to make fit. No, that's not what we expect from policing. It's certainly not justice.
No, and it's always surprising when I teach students, and my module team teaches about false confessions. There will always be a handful of students who say, well, I would never falsely confess to something. And it fascinates me. I recently spoke to Professor Jodi Jones, who shed a lot of light on this. And it made me think of a situation I was in when I was 7 years old. So I was at primary school, and me and 3 other boys were pulled up in front of the teacher at break time because we all had access to a book and somebody had sort of drawn in it. Not a massive deal here. All I wanted to do was to get outside in the sunshine and play football with my friends. So after what felt like an age, but must have been 5 minutes, I made up a story that said my little sister took it down from the record player at my parents' house, and she must have done it. And I think, you know, I wasn't in any massive trouble there, but it was a complete lie. That didn't happen. And one of the 3 other boys that were there, they were, you know, whether they knew or not, but it definitely wasn't me. Yeah. I think, so I share that with my students and I say, you know, it just makes you want to say something. And if you're being led by police officers or you are intimidated, this is a hostile environment with, it's completely alien to a lot of suspects in the police station, especially if it's your first time there. Yeah. And I just think the pressure and, you know, the idea of what the review commission said about looking to break Luke and his brother, that doesn't strike me as looking to investigate or to discover the truth. They want to be told what they want to hear. And I think it's appalling.
I think the senior investigating officer said in a media interview after Luke was convicted, it was like he was trying to control the interview or something like that. Like he was trying to make it go the way he wanted it to go. And you're thinking, wait a minute, there are 3 of your guys going hell for leather on a 15-year-old kid, and you're actually asking us to believe that the 15-year-old kid was the one in control? This is insane.
Yeah. I mean, I'm laughing, but I mean, that is laughable. The idea that experienced investigators are struggling to control the room, whereas 3 of them with a 15-year-old lad. That sounds like a tall story to me, but But yeah, so just to recap, as we draw to a close, if the public, if anyone has any information, they can contact you. Are your details easily searchable and findable on the internet?
Yeah, you'll find me. I have 2 Facebook pages. So there's my personal page, which is just Sandra Lean. There's also the Dr. Sandra Lean page. You can also find me on Twitter, again, just Sandra Lean. And I think there are a few email addresses that come up if you Google me, all of which come back to me as well. So I'm easy to find.
Yeah, wonderful.
Anybody that's got anything, it doesn't matter if you think it's nothing or insignificant, just let us know anyway. It's these
Absolutely.
things that eventually take it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Let someone else be the judge of whether or not it's worth saying.
Yeah.
Just come ahead and say it. Sandra, I'd like to thank you so much for your time today. It was a really interesting chat, and hopefully there may be some leads, or at least keep this case in the public's eye, in the public's mind. So thank you very much for your time today.
And thank you for letting me tell the story again. Thank
No
you.
problem. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Sandra, for such an interesting talk today. It sounds like this is a very troublesome case, and hopefully justice can be seen to be done in the end and eventually. I'd like to obviously thank you for your time today. I'd like to thank all the show's supporters, Joe Doherty, Donna Jenkins, Lucy Green, Claire Maloney and Robbins, Elise Goff and Michael Saw. Thank you very much for your contributions to keep the show ticking over, and I hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to support the show, please check out the Ko-fi link in the pinned comments. Please join me next week where we will be speaking to Sophie Marsh, who's a PhD candidate at the University of the West of England, and we will be discussing rape myths and issues within investigations of rape that lead to attrition. Thank you very much for listening.